Hi there, and in less than 2 weeks we are about to get a new 1.2 update in Honkai Star Rail, where we are about to get 2 new 5-star playable characters, which are Kafka and Blade, and in the nearest future we are about to get the livestream where we are gonna get some details about these 2 characters, plus the 4-star character of the update. But in this video let's just remind all the information we currently have about these 2 characters. For Blade we have some information from closed beta 2, while for Kafka we have some information from tutorial, though keep in mind there is no better time for developers to change these characters in terms of numbers, amounts of turns for their buffs and debuffs and everything like that. That's why we're not really discussing like the actual numbers and multipliers, we are only talking generally about gimmicks and mechanics. Also for that same reason we are not talking about traces and eidolons, because most likely they will be changed a lot. So without further ado, let's jump right into it and start from Blade. So Blade is a wind destruction character, and if you're talking about his kit, let's start from his talent, because every time this character takes any type of damage, we're gonna get some amount of stacks for some amount of turns, and when we reach maximum amount of those stacks, we're gonna consume all of those and launch a follow-up attack which will deal damage to all the enemies. And what's the most interesting, we are not only scaling of our attack of the character with this damage, we also scale of the amount of HP we lost during building up this passive, and also we're gonna restore Blade's HP by some percentage of his max HP. This is talking about his talent, and overall this character revolves a lot around dealing damage to himself. And if you're talking about his basic attack, there is nothing special with it, like any base form of basic attack, we just deal our elemental damage. But what is really interesting is skill, because we first of all consume our HP depending on our max HP, and then we immediately advance actions forward for this character by most likely 100%. This will mean that immediately right after you use his skill, you will be able to take another action with Blade. In addition, we'll increase damage of this character and also enhance our basic attack, so it will have increased multiplier and maybe will even target just an enemies for some amount of turns. But most importantly, this skill can't even physically be used while your basic attack is enhanced. So at this point we might say that this character doesn't really need skill points to deal damage, because we only need to use his skill once, and after that for some amount of turns you just use your basic attacks. Though you have to keep in mind that with his enhanced basic attack he can't generate skill, and if you're talking about basic attacks, usually they are really valuable, first of all because they don't consume a skill point, and secondly because on top of that they generate 1 additional skill point. So value of using basic attack is usually 2 skill points, while with enhanced basic attacks of Blade it's like 1 skill point efficiency, though still for some amount of turns you only can use his basic attacks unless you have to reapply your skill again. But overall it's of course incomparable to what we have with Sealy and Genuine, which are currently the best DPS characters we have in the game. They usually always want to use their skills instead of basic attacks, and that's why of course they drain lots of skill points, though at least from what we know from closed betas, most likely Blade will be competitor to those 2 characters in terms of damage. Talking about his ultimate, this is also additional source of damage for Blade, where we can deal damage to multiple enemies, also scaling from both attack and max HP of this character. And what's really interesting, with using his ultimate, Blade sets his current HP to 50% no matter how much HP he had before. And what's really interesting, at least judging how it works in closed beta 2, or it worked in closed beta 2, if you had more than 50% of HP it would count as you deal damage to yourself, while if you had less than 50% of HP it will count just as healing. And as we remember, with our talent we really want to take damage with Blade, and since we can deal damage with both our skill and ultimate, and also we most likely will be able to deal damage to ourselves with enhanced version of our basic attack, it will be really easy to trigger our talent's follow-up attack. We don't really need to actually take 5 attacks from the enemy to launch it. So overall this character is really good at dealing damage with at the same time really efficient skill point usage, though of course we will need to consume lots of this character's HP, and at this point most likely we will need some healing character, and of course most likely the best healing option for this character might be Locha, because if we have Locha in the team, he will be emergency healing our Blade every time he gets to less than 50% of his HP. Also we'll be able to apply that field, which will passively heal us every time we deal damage with any of our characters, and again with Blade we will be able to use basic attacks without consuming our skill points to at the same time deal damage to the enemies and also heal ourselves if field is active. And if we are talking about his technique, we will immediately attack the enemy, so you can't combine this technique with, for example, Silverwolf's technique, but at the same time we will immediately consume 20% of our Blade's max HP and deal 40% of Blade's max HP wind damage to all enemies. So if you really need to nuke all the enemies at the start of the battle, you can just use this technique, though honestly speaking I think it's much better to use Silverwolf's technique if you want to combine them in one team. So now after talking about Blade, let's get to Kafka, which lots of people are already confident to summon for, even if they don't know what she actually does. With her we only had her during tutorial, so lots of things might be completely different, and of course we don't pay attention to any multipliers, percentages and amounts of turns, because everything like this might be changed on her release. So if you're talking about Kafka, she is lightning nihility character, and if you're talking about nihility, currently we can divide nihility path into two types. We have nihility utility debuffing characters and also nihility DOT type characters, which don't really have that much utility debuffs but can apply lots of damage over time. And Kafka is much more closer to second type of nihility characters, because first of all she can provide lots of DOT damage by herself, secondly she can trigger other characters' DOT damage immediately, which is really interesting. So if you're talking about her kit, let's start from her talent as well. And with Kafka's talent, every time your ally uses basic attack to deal damage to shocked enemy, Kafka will launch a follow-up attack, dealing lightning damage to that enemy, though this effect can only be triggered once per turn, so most likely you will need to take one action with Kafka to then be able to again trigger this talent. Talking about shock which we need on the enemy, so Kafka can launch her follow-up attacks. Of course we can apply shock when we break the enemy with any lightning character, but also if you're using Serval, you can just apply shock as DOT debuff on the enemies. So even though we only read her talent, we already can see some synergies between some different DOT characters. Now if we go deeper, we of course skip basic attack because there is nothing interesting in Kafka's basic attack, but with her skill we deal damage to one enemy and also additional damage to adjacent enemies, and if target of this skill has any type of DOT on themselves, we will immediately deal damage equal to some percentage, most likely 100% of all current DOT effects enemy has. It's really hard to say how really efficient this skill would be, because in theory it might just like trigger one turn of those DOT effects, so we will reduce the amount of DOTs taken by the enemy by one turn, but apply the damage immediately, or maybe it will just duplicate the damage which enemy is about to receive on their turn and apply it immediately. So anyway, it might turn all this slow DOT damage into something really bursting. We'll see how it works on practice, of course. And if we're talking about ultimate, it just damage to all enemy with chance to apply shock additionally. So if you, for example, don't want to use Serval, if you want to use some different comp, you anyway can apply shock on all the enemies. So at this point we can say that Kafka is self-sufficient. With her technique, Kafka immediately attacks and deals damage to the enemy and also has chance to apply shock to all the enemies. Overall, this is a really good technique because in this way you don't really need ultimate to apply any DOT at the start of the battle. On the other hand, we immediately attack the enemies. This is not that big bad thing, but I'm really sad about the fact that first of all you can't combine this technique with Serval's technique, and also we can't, for example, combine these techniques with Silverwolf's technique. So overall it's not bad, it's just aggressive, so keep that in mind. Choose what technique you really want in some specific battle. So to conclude, in 1.2 we're about to get two really interesting and specific DPS characters. If previously we had more straightforward hunt and erudition characters, now we are about to have destruction and nihility. Most likely, of course, rules in Memory of Chaos will favor new characters. Maybe there will be some bonus damage from DOT, maybe there will be some additional advantages from losing your HP, but overall it's really interesting how meta will change with those two characters, because currently we, honestly speaking, only have 2 solid DPS time limited characters, and when we get even one of those in the future to replace them, I'm really curious how will the percentages of usage of the characters in Memory of Chaos look. But for now, that's all. Looking forward to that live stream where we will get some official details about those 2 characters and how they will act. And that's actually it. Thanks for your kind attention. Don't forget to subscribe if you like my content. Also, maybe you want to like or leave some comment. And that's it. Thanks for your kind attention and see you soon.